So now we're ready to start writing some code. Let's go over to our main. I'm going to go ahead and close this to give her some more room. So the first thing, and you don't have to do this, but I explain this why I do it. A lot of times you'll see, just out of habit, the first thing I do when I get into a class is I'll stick a comment in class on the last bracket. That's because as I'm writing code and creating lots of functions, and you get these lambdas that have even more brackets and if statements, and you get little curly brackets all over the place. And what I found is that sometimes I have a tendency to kind of lose track of where it's at, or do I have enough? Even though there's dotted lines, I get all that. But I tend to get a little lost on it, and so I'll stick a little comment at the end that says in class. And so I always know this is the final brace. Again, just something I do. I certainly don't expect anybody else in the world to do it. I don't see anybody else bothering with it, but to me, it makes the code a little bit easier to see and read, so I stick it in there. Again, just for my own benefit. Okay, so when we run this code, the first thing you see, the code that was generated is this onCreate. onCreate runs when the activity is created, as you expect. And what it does first is the save instance state, and we'll talk about that in a future video. And then it says, set the content view r.layout.activity_main. So R is short for resource, and what it does, it goes out to the resources, it grabs the layout named activity main. Well, you'll remember, this is called activity main. So what's going to happen is code over here will launch, and it will read that XML that's in this file, and it will create the UI. All that happens for you automatically. So the UI is all there. Now, to get access to the controls, we have to write a little bit of code. So for example, let's say we want to get access to the tip amount label. So if we go back, if I go back here, remember tip amount, it is, it's called text view tip amount. And it's going to be important to remember the name. Let's go back over here, and I can say val, and I can call this variable whatever I want. I'm just going to call it t for right now. We'll go back and change it to something else later. I'll explain that in a minute. So to use that, we use a built-in function, find by ID. And in find by ID, you see the little brackets. You probably are familiar with this with Java, but this is where we're going to specify the data type. So we're going to say find view by ID. The data type is a text view. Then to find it, we do r.id dot, then the name that you entered. So here's another reason why if you start all your names with type of control, it's way easier to find. So text view, tip amount. And the nice thing about this is you'll notice that this isn't an optional variable. If you went and looked at it, you'll see that it actually returns a real variable, in this case of data type text view. Because this file gets automatically generated, this class gets generated for you by Android Studio, it knows for sure it exists, and you get the reference. So we don't have to fool around with optionals or anything like that. It's actually pretty convenient. Some other mobile tools do it a little bit differently. This is actually very, very nice. So at this point now, I know I have an access to the text input, and the value is, or the variable name is t. But that's a terrible name. I only called it this just to show you that you can call it whatever you want. It really doesn't matter. But you will see that me and pretty much everybody else will name the variable the same as this name. The only reason they're the same is I named them the same. It's very important. I want you to understand that whatever this variable's name is, it's arbitrary. It's whatever you want to call it. For your own sanity, you should call it the same as what the name you gave it in your code, but they don't necessarily have to be the same. So now that I have that, I can use it. So I could say something like text view tip amount dot text equals hello world. So now when my application runs, we'll go out, we'll find this control, we'll assign this variable to be a reference to that control, and then we set the text property programmatically to hello world. So if we run the program, give it a moment to compile and install. And you'll see, there you go, hello world. So we'll leave that code here for a minute. We're going to use it again in just a little bit. But let's get access to some of the other controls. One of the things, as you can imagine, one of the things that we're going to need is the amount that was entered by the user. So this is a little bit more complicated. So let's write some code to go get that. Actually, you know what? Let's switch that up a little bit. Instead, let's take a look at this button. The amount, we're going to need it when you click the button. So let's start writing that code for real. So again, to get a reference to the button, I'm going to say val button compute equals find view by ID, and the data type is a button. Actually, let's talk about that for a second. So let's pause for a second. How do you know what the data type is? So if you go over here, you drew the button, right? But maybe you don't know that it was called a button. Maybe it could have a different name. Anytime you're not sure, you can go over to the XML view and you can see. So here, this is the data type right here, button. Inside my radio, it's a radio group, and then each one is a radio button. But these are the names, the data type names. And so we do r.id.button. Oh, there you go, compute. So now we have button compute. What I want to do is I want to have an action occur. So I can say button compute dot on click listener. So on click listener, there's a longer way to do this, but I'm just going to show you a shortcut right now. Go ahead and delete that and put some curly brackets. And you'll see that in gray here, it shows up. It becomes passed in automatically. We're not going to use it, but it gives you a reference to the button itself. But inside this code here, this is the code that will execute when you click the button. So we could do something like this. Let's take this code out. Let's get a reference to the button. And then let's get a reference to the text view tip amount. You click the button. Actually, it's pretty long. I don't know if that fit on the screen or not. We'll see. So let's run that, and then we'll go back and talk about the code one more time. So everything's out. The control's here, but remember, it's blank to start with. I'll touch the button. You click the button. So let's look at that code one more time to see what happened. So this up here is boilerplate. Nothing for us to do. But we get down here, what do we do? Get a reference to the compute button. Add a click handler. Okay, oh, by the way, the comments I just put in here, I absolutely, from a software engineering standpoint, would not consider these to be good comments. I'm going to get off the subject here like I always do. A good comment explains why you're doing something, not what you're doing. Like in this case, any even mildly competent Android developer looking at this code knows you're getting a reference to the compute button. So this comment is completely unnecessary. However, this code I'm actually going to make available to you. So I want to comment it because the purpose of this comment is to teach what the code's doing. Whereas good comments in real software explain why you're doing something. You only explain what you're doing when what you're doing is not obvious, or it needs some extra explanation around the reasoning for what it's going to do or how you did it. If that doesn't make sense, it'd be a good topic we could talk about on a Friday class. Okay, so add click handler. So what happens? So we're creating a lambda when you call set on click listener, and then it takes one parameter, and it's a lambda. So remember, we have the curly brackets around it. This block of code is a variable. It's first class citizen, and it is the code that will get assigned to the click listener. So every time now you click this button, this code will run. And what we're doing here in this code is we're grabbing a reference to text view tip amount, and then we're just setting the text to you click the button. Okay, so far so good. Check the time here. We are Okay, let's say, you know, we're at almost 10 minutes. I'll go ahead and stop this video. And on the next one, we will have the user enter an amount, and we will use that amount to do something. So let's stop the video here, and we'll start on the next one.